say they were winning the race. They told me it wasn't no catching up, but just like it wasn't no room in the caddy, I had to lap them up. Now I'm in the gym doing 2-a-days. Push, push. Now I'm in the gym doing 2-a-days. Push, push.
And I'm getting money in any way. All I know is going getting paid. My moving weight like every day. Now I'm in the gym doing 2-a-days.
I'm in the gym doing 2-a-days. Push, push. I'm in the gym doing 2-a-days.
Guys, welcome to the Run Up the Score podcast with Carl Reed and my co-host Nunu Washington. We have a special guest in here today, Mr. Stephen Rhodes, one of the most preeminent financial advisors in the country for all the professional sports with his company Signify Wealth. And Stephen, we're going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and kind of give everybody your background, your education, and kind of what you're doing at Signify.
Well, listen, man, I appreciate you having me on. Been looking forward to jumping on this call. I know you said you had the studio set up beforehand, but obviously given everything that's going down with the COVID-19, Zoom to the rescue, man. So this has been cool. So, but yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited. Heard nothing but good things about the show, and so glad to participate. So do you want the short story or the long story on the background? You tell me.
We want the long story. We want the listeners to really understand and get a feel for your journey and what it took.
Got it. Okay. So I'm originally from St. Louis, so y'all know what that actually means. Everybody wants to know what high school I went to. So I'll just go ahead and get it out there early on. I graduated from Webster Groves High School. So born and raised here, played football, basketball, ran track when I was at Webster. I was part of the first state championship basketball team many, many moons ago. And I was always that kid that loved athletics, loved playing sports. Started playing JFL along many, many moons ago down at Kirkwood. And school always came pretty easy to me. The Lord blessed me to have a good mind. So I was always typically like one of the only black faces in a lot of the AP classes. And so when I came out of Webster, I was able to come out with straight A's and spoke at graduation. But it was kind of that was there. We had some guys that are really talented. Actually, they've been in the coaching world in the high school locally, and these guys had phenomenal careers, and none of them got a chance to really take their talent to the next level at the D1 level. And thankfully for somebody like me, I started playing quarterback my sophomore year, and so I started as a junior, as a senior, but I really wasn't built to be a quarterback. I should have been playing corner, but our coach was set up at that point in time where he was, I think, fearful of me being injured because we didn't really have a whole lot of depth. So by the time it came around the senior year, I should have had game film going out to really try to position me to get to fulfill my personal dream of playing D1, because I had a bunch of guys. That was kind of like our mantra is D1 or die, right? So we worked out, we did all those different things, but it actually didn't work out for any of the guys. But thankfully there was a coach, Coach Williams, who came aboard. He was a brother who did a lot of training with us at that point in time. He started kind of shopping some film. So guys did get a chance to play after high school. But fortunately for me, I had the option of trying to continue to play at like a lower D1 school, or I actually got a full academic scholarship to Washington University here in town, right? And that seems like that's a no-brainer, right? But as a young kid, it was D1 and die. I meant it, right? So it was like, I'm ready to say no to this academic scholarship because I wanted to go and play D1 ball. And thankfully at that point, man, my mom was, she was wise enough to be able to slow me down and say, listen, son, I know you want to go play at this school. I mean, I took senior pictures in the gear, the whole nine. Like, now the other part of it was, there was some people, there was a young lady who I had my eye on that also went to that school. And so, how sometimes these factors weigh, pretty large at that point in time. But thankfully, my mom was wise enough to say, I know you want to go this route, but trust me, this will be the school that I know you won't regret going to. And I'm so glad that I listened to her advice. So I went to WashU and triple majored in finance, human resources, and management. Played football there for a season and a half. Ended up tearing my ACL, and then actually just didn't really have the heart to continue to play anymore. It was kind of one of those fluke injuries. I was back of the end zone. I was playing corner at this point in time, and half back pass. I kind of read it all the way. Went to plant to go, pick it off in the back of the end zone, and the knee went, so it wasn't one of those gruesome hits. It was just literally I put my foot down and it went away. So I never really got the confidence back. And I was always fearful of like, okay, well, if that happened with nothing, crazy going on, then what's to keep the other one from going that same way? So so that was kind of the end of my football career, man. And it was actually really tough. Even though I knew I wasn't going to play anymore after college, football was still a big part of who I was. It was part of my identity. So I went through, like a mini depression of like, man, who am I if I'm not playing? And like, what does this mean? And like, that's how I built community and camaraderie. I didn't really know how to interact with dudes for real because you never really had to. They were always around. We're always on our way to the weight room. We're always on our way to watching film. And so it was a big life shift for me. And so went through that whole process and then was always serious about school, but became more serious about my studies. And so I kind of lined my career up where I thought, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to leave WashU. I want to go to work for like a big time like consultancy firm. And I'll do that for a couple of years. And then my plan was to go from there, go back, get an MBA at a place like Harvard or someplace like that, and then probably do Wall Street or something else, right? So that's kind of how I had my career tracked. And I had a friend of mine who was a year ahead of me, right? So my senior year at WashU, he was already in the workforce and he was in the world that I wanted to be in, the consultancy world, right? And I love the idea of being a consultant because, these are some of the smartest people in the world. And these big corporations hire these consultants to come in and solve all these problems. So you get a chance to kind of come in at the C-suite and work with some of the top execs potentially. And you're really helping them figure out problems that they don't have time or bandwidth to solve. So it was the idea that you get a chance to see different industries, right? And I actually did an internship for a guy who was in that space. So I thought, okay, this is where I want to go, right? So was kind of going down that path, and we conversed our final year, and then only come to find out that my man was doing 80, 90-hour weeks. I'll never forget, he mentioned to me that they had like a gopher that worked at the firm. So that he could keep working, like if you needed to go get groceries and have them put in your house, that's obviously long before Instagram, not Instagram, but Instacart was around. Or if you needed to buy birthday gifts, they had people on staff that would go take care of that stuff for you so that you can stay working. And so he had a relationship that he was serious about that disintegrated. And I just met this young lady at WashU who I knew was the one, right? She's now been my wife for 16 years and mother of my 4 children. And I knew if I kept down that path, like this was not gonna happen, right? So then I thought, okay, well, I got interviews literally lined up, ended up canceling the interviews, which, as I think about that today, like, I don't know how I would feel if my son came to me talking about I got these, I've gone to this top university, I got these interviews lined up, and I'm gonna cancel these interviews because I got somebody that I'm serious about. Like, it worked out for me, but in retrospect, I don't know how I would respond as a dad. Like, no, I don't know, bro. That we have to think that one through. But that's the choice I made, and so I didn't go down that path. And I now was trying to figure out, okay, career-wise, I know what I don't want to do, but I need to figure out what I really want to do now. And so, man, the Lord just in the way he could. Connected me with the guy from Webster. So when I was in 6th grade, he was not my teacher, but a teacher in the school district, right? And I happened to run into him at a Quick Trip one day, right? So my final semester, and ran into him. We started shooting the breeze, and he was a principal at Maplewood Richmond Heights Middle School here in town. This is back when it was off of Highway 40. You had the long slide coming down, Highway 40. So he convinced me to come substitute, which is what I always wanted to hear, because even though I had an academic scholarship, I'm 1 of 5, single mom. Dad was kind of in and out of our lives and out of prison. So even though I had an academic scholarship, I still had to work for anything extra, right? So when he said substitute, I was like, that's a part-time job, right? So I started on a Monday, fall in love with the kids on Tuesday, and I think it was either that Friday or the following Friday. He's like, hey, Stephen, put on a tie. Got some people I want you to meet. So I'm like, all right, throw on the only tie that I own, right? No clue that I'm being interviewed by the superintendent and the assistant superintendent of the school. And they said, hey, we've enjoyed getting a chance to know you. And I said, well, this has been great. I got to get back to my class. And they were like, no, we want to offer you a teaching position. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I didn't want to feel like I was insulting them, but I kind of reminded them, I said, hey, I did triple major, but they were finance, human resources, and management. Like, that's all in the business school. Like, there's 0 education classes in there. So like, how can I teach? And they said, well, if you're willing to to go back to school, you can get a temporary certificate, and then we'll pay for you to go back to get certified. So I was like, that was great. So they sent me back to WashU, got a master's in education, got certified, and I started teaching math at Maplewood and Richmond Heights in the alternative school, right? So again, for those who are not in education, I'm sure you guys know this, but that's where you go when you get kicked out of the normal school, right? So these are kind of the worst of the worst kids, if you would. But man, I absolutely loved it. I never forget thinking to myself, I cannot believe I'm getting paid to work with these guys, right? Because they were 98% of them were African-American males. And man, like I just connected with those dudes in a way that I never thought was going to be possible. And it's really, that's when I realized that my real gift and my passion is like teaching, right? You know, for a while, I thought, man, I should have looked better if I would have went back to school and got an MBA and my resume would look a certain way and that sort of scenario. But honestly, like the Lord knew what he was doing, because I never would have known that one of the gifts, like I said, is teaching, right? And so I knew I wouldn't do that for the rest of my life, but it was a critical period where I got a chance to really see and sense, you know, like what God, one of the ways that he created me. And so I ended up leaving teaching eventually because, again, I hadn't gone there full time. And the same guy who convinced me to come substitute teach also left and became a financial advisor. And I remember he started talking to me about it, and he was like, hey, this is something that I think will be right up your alley. And I remember thinking, like, wealth management, like what is that? Like growing up the way I grew up, like there was no wealth to manage. There were bill collectors to avoid, but there was no wealth to manage, right? So so I literally started as like an intern, like doing the grunt work, going to the meetings, hearing how people talked about money, hearing about these different concepts, and I would scribble notes and do all kind of the grunt work. And that's how I got a chance to really kind of learn the business, you know, like from the ground up, right? To be able to see, and we were working, like, again, a lot of the clients we were working with were teachers at that point, right? So just helping, you know, public school teachers who were working in these school districts, you know, trying to figure out how pensions work, how they can retire. And these are people who've like given their lives to, you know, their profession, and they don't have a whole lot to show for it, but it matters to them. And so we did a lot of planning. I got a chance to start doing that. And so those were really a lot of my first clients. And then, make a very long story short, eventually left that firm, started with the firm that is now Signify Wealth. And then we got a chance to get connected to some other clients in the athlete space. But at the end of the day, people always ask me, like, do you miss teaching? And like we always mentioned when we got together, Coach, like I still am teaching. The only thing that's different now is I taught math then. And when I was talking about, you know, those numbers, the students would be like falling asleep while I was talking. But now that I'm talking about finance in a different set of numbers, and more importantly, these numbers are their numbers, now all of a sudden they're like, all right, what we're going to talk about next? What else do we have to discuss? So, so anyway, you asked for the long story. That's how I got to where I am currently.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Rhodes?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you talk to people, they talk about school's curriculum. So do you think finance should be taught at an early age?
Oh, absolutely.
Like what age would you say? Well, like what grades? Fifth?
I mean, I think, personally speaking, I think when you're talking about math, you're talking about numbers. Like when you're teaching a kid about how to add and how to subtract, right? It's real easy, in my opinion, to just say it to naturally, as you normally do. You may hear about apples. Like if you have one apple and two apples, how many, if you add them together, how many do you have? You have three, right? Well, I think the same concept should apply to dollars and the currency, to start really early with kids. And I think they are, and it's gotten a lot better, but you absolutely need to incorporate that really, really early.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you said when you start working in the school, in the alternative school, and you start seeing all of the, you know, kids that look like us or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. What was the first thing that came to your mind?
Well, the first thing that came into my mind was, man, like how did I not end up where they are, right? Like I saw so much of myself in them, right? And I think that was the reason it was so easy to connect with the guys. And he gave me a heart to really want to help them. But then you start realizing, and it's like, man, like you really realize, like, and again, not that I'm here to preach to you guys, you really realize how blessed you really are, you know, because like I grew up around dudes who had similar outcomes to the kids that I was working with, and some of them even worse than that, right? And it just kind of makes you, you know, thankful to reflect back that, man, what was it that made my path different? Or who was it that really intervened, you know what I mean, in my life to be able to help me take a different path than some of those young guys? I mean, I got some of the guys some of my first students who I still keep up with to this day. You know, some of them made some poor decisions. So I got, you know, one of them that's locked up. I talk to him whenever he calls, still put money in his book to this day. I mean, he's almost 30 now, you know what I mean? But so it's just one of those things when I look at his life and I realize there's a lot of similarities. And so yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind. Like I saw so much of myself. I'm like, man, I don't know what it was differently about me than them.
Being in the financial industry and having a lot of athletes, what do you think are some of the key reasons why so many professional athletes end up broken without money when their career is over?
Yeah, I gotta make this short because there's a lot of different factors. But I think the number one thing, I think if you boil it all down to, there's a lot of very specific things that I think that happen. Like you could talk about, you know, child support. There's a lot of different things that, you know, I could point to. I think the fundamental thing is they are in a position where, and I think we all are like this in some ways where we're not dumb, we're not ignorant, but we just haven't been exposed to certain things, right? And whether it's, you know, whether you can experience that if you've never worked on cars before and you finally take your car to a mechanic, right? And they hit you with, hey man, this is gonna be at least 2-3 racks to get this fixed. And you kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even know the parts that you're describing, right? And so then you kind of have that sense of like, is this legitimate? Is this dude running a rack? Like, I don't know enough to even know what I'm looking at, right? I think that is the reality of what happens to pro athletes, because they go from, you know, spending time with you guys, right? Putting a lot of time, effort, and energy into building their craft with the hopes that they could one day get to that next level and have all the trappings that come with it. And sometimes I think they even convinced that they know they're going to get there, but then there's not that preparation period. So then what ends up happening is you get a young man and all of a sudden he gets to that point. And then, you know, and then it comes down to, okay, now who am I going to really trust, right? And I always say that trust piece is, you know, one of the concepts that I describe in the book is that trust is composed of at least 2 things, character and competence, right? It's probably more, but as I think about it, you trust people that have character, and you trust people who are competent. I usually see that most athletes that end up broke usually find somebody that they trust that has one but not both of those characteristics, right? So in other words, they are somebody who has good character, however they define good character. Most of the time it's like somebody who they feel like really has their best interest at heart, right? Who would take a bullet for them, like maybe they've been in, you know, fist fights together and they feel like, hey, if I had my back to the wall, this is what I would call, right? Because I know they've been tried and tested, so they trust the character piece, right? And then they have them involved in some sort of aspect of their money, but those folks don't have the competency, right? So it's kind of like, you know, my brother who was a mechanic, my dad's a mechanic, so that's why I use that example. But, you know, if I got heart surgery, I can't go to my brother, right? I got to go to a doctor. Now, this doctor doesn't know me like my brother does, doesn't love me nearly as much as my brother does, but he's got the skill set that I need. So I think that's one part of it. Or the other side is you say, okay, bet, I'm not going to worry about the character piece. I'll go find somebody who's competent, right? And they have all the credentials, they have all the different smarts, they say all the right different things. But you know the result of that part of it as well, right? And so they're saying all the different right things, but by the time you figure out that they are a snake, it's too late, right? So I think.
Can I ask you this, Mr. Rhodes? What's more important to, like, let's say a guy probably gonna go second round, right? In his situation, what's more important, an agent or a financial advisor?
So it depends on how you define what's more important.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Do you think in today's sports climate, a guy really needs an agent?
So I would say in some instances, yes, some instances, no, right? So like, I think you've got the model of LeBron James, who's, you know, obviously chose his childhood friend to become his agent eventually. And that's how he started with to begin with, but that's who he actually had. And I'm not taking any saying anything against his agent, but he got a chance LeBron gave him an opportunity, and he had to work hard. And he seems like a really smart guy that's done extremely well for himself. So he's maximized that opportunity. But I guess the luxury that that LeBron had is that because he had been so dedicated to his craft, I don't want to say anybody could have been his agent, but when you got everybody who wants to work with you and you check all the boxes and there's no questions, then you're really talking about somebody who's transactional, right? And just needs to be able to try to get the best deal as possible.
So when you say check off the boxes, right? So in terms of an agent, mm-hmm. what is checking off all the boxes in terms of an agent?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question too, but I want to finish this last thought before I forget. So I think that when a player has question marks, whether it's about their size, their speed, their durability, off the field stuff, or all these other different aspects of it as well, that's when I think an agent is extremely, extremely important. I used to be of the mindset that it's kind of like, all right, well, you know, it's a slotted system, right? The agents can't really add a whole lot of value, right? I won't talk about who the player is, but I literally have worked with clients who, you know, sometimes these agents are trying to think of the best way to describe this without giving away details. So I had a player, ended up going in the first round, right? When it was time for him to declare early as a junior, the school, you know, you put your name in and they come back with a rating, right? And the school came back and told him his rating should have been, you know, a lot lower. He shouldn't go to school. He needs to stay in school. He doesn't need to go to the pros. They need to go to the pros, right? And the coach said, I talked to all these different GMs, and this is kind of what they've been saying. Now this is something the player told me after the fact, right? Because I started working with him on the financial side and didn't know that this was the case. He basically went on to tell me that his agent said, listen, you come out, you're going in the first round, right? Now I say this, I'm gonna share this story because and I think it's important that you always understand context. Even when you have a real life example of something that works, you always got to be reminded that there's people who blow a whole lot of smoke and then can't deliver, right? So I've heard horror stories of agents telling guys, you're gonna be a first round pick, you come out early, and that's not in the kid's best interest. It's in the agent's best interest because they want to rep them, and then they fall to the 7th round, they lost a whole lot of money. So I want to just kind of preface it. But in this case, what ended up happening was the agent was so tied in with the GMs at a couple different teams that this agent had actually done a deal for another player that played the same position, right? And had a handshake deal that, hey, even on paper, the deal was supposed to be this number of years. The reality was they said, we're going to write it up for this, but he gets a chance to walk at this at a shorter duration, right? So what was kind of unbeknownst to anybody is that this team that on paper didn't look like they were going to be in the market for this position actually was going to be in the market for this position. And so what ended up happening, the agent ended up having a lot of conversations, and on draft day, out of the blue, my client's in the green room, and this team out of nowhere traded up and selected him in the first round, right? Now, I say that to say that I don't think everybody has that sort of pull, but to answer your question about like what you want to look for in an agent, of course, the same things that I talked about, character and confidence, but I think to be more specific, in my opinion, as I've seen, and again, I don't get into the agent side, I stick on my side on the financial side, but an agent has to have such rapport with the GMs or the people in the front office that they can make a phone call and that there's enough relationship that person can pick up the phone and they get a chance to explain what's going on with the kids. So if a team has a question about the kids, you know, hey, he's been injured for the last 2 or 3 years, you know, like somebody needs to be able to make that phone call and explain to the coaches, hey, here's what's going on. Here's why he was actually this particular way. Or, hey, I know you're hearing rumors about what happened off the field. Here's what's really going on, right? I've seen too many people that have a lot of talent that if you don't have somebody who can call and tell your story, then the team is left up to kind of make sense of it the best that they can. And that can mean the difference in where you end up getting drafted. So I don't know if that answered your question directly. Because I don't think there's a straightforward example of, I think there's some instance like LeBron where anybody can be, but I think the majority of people.
Do you think agents have the player's best interest or their best interest at heart?
So I feel like in anything there's a combination of both. I think there's some legitimate people that are agents in this space who genuinely do have their players' best interest at heart. Right. And then I think it's just like some people that are out there, like, again, you probably say that about some head coaches as well. You got some guys that are out there that would do whatever is necessary to help their guys succeed. And you got some other guys that are out there that are like looking to ride their guys' coattails up to the next level and kind of move from that direction, right? So I think that same thing applies to the agent world and the financial advisory world as well. I personally, this is no knock against agents, I personally don't like the business model per se, because, you know, you got it if they negotiate a 4-year deal and you get rid of them 2 years or 2 weeks after they sign the deal, they still get paid for that entire contract and they're not around necessarily to do work. So that's, to me, that's more of a knock against the business model. I understand why they do it that way, but I like the idea of like, if you say you're going to do something, then you got to be around to actually fulfill it. And then if you don't, the player has some sort of recourse. And I guess they could fire him, but monetarily speaking, they still get paid.
Right. So now if a guy, so let's say you got a guy, he's coming out, he's a first round pick, right? First round pick. He comes from humble beginnings. He doesn't have a lot of financial literacy. What are the things you're teaching him, and what does he need to know, and what does his family and the people around him need to understand about his money and how he needs to make it last because of how his career is going to go? Everybody wants a house. Everybody wants a car. You know, he's got a lot of people kind of with their hands out. How are you advising them to deal with that? And what does he need to do to make sure that he's on the right path financially?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing is like, again, starting with the plan, right? I mean, it's no different than playing football. You don't just run out on the field on Friday nights or Saturday, you know, mornings and just hope that things are going to work out. Like, you have prepared the entire week so that when you get in those situations, everybody's on the same page about knowing what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, right? And I think it's no different with the player and also the parents, right? And making sure that they understand that here's the facts. Like, here's where you are now. Here's where you want to be, right? This is the NFL, which I'm sure you heard people say, not for long, right? This money is going to be for this amount of time, and you want to make sure it lasts for this amount of time, right? Which is way easier said than done. And so it has to start from day one, making sure that everybody has a clear plan, a clear play, a clear vision of what we're trying to accomplish, right? Because pretty early on, you can start to see who's on and who's not, right? And then you got to start defining roles. And, you know, just like anything else, I think, you know, my job when I played in high school was I didn't play every position, but my job was to make sure that everybody was in the right position, right? So if I'm coming, we're breaking out of the huddle, and I see somebody lining up in the wrong spot, my job was to say, hey, scoot over, here's what we're doing, just to make sure everybody gets squared away. And I think a lot of that has to happen with the families and the players too. It's just getting them all on the same page. And, you know, sometimes as you start to have those conversations, you realize that not everybody is playing, you know, is playing from the same playbook. Everybody has their own playbook. And then you gotta start making the tough decisions and having the tough conversations to make sure, hey, listen, this won't continue to work unless we get everybody on the same page. And so that's the tough part. And that's why it's got to start early. And then you got to it's like building in layers. You have one conversation, you have more conversation, you keep coming back to it. And sometimes it feels like, man, we just talked about this. Well, we did, but it didn't all land, and you got to come back around and have some more conversations, you know, about it. So that's usually kind of the first starting point. And honestly, the last thing I would say is I don't make any assumptions when it comes to like the basics of, you know, financial training. I mean, you know, I think anytime you assume, you know what the result ends up being, right? But you know, I remember having a guy, we were talking about getting some basic things set up. And he was kind of listening and nodding, and we were around some other people. And then later on, he came back and he's like, "Hey man, so what is a checking account? How does that work?" Right? This is a dude that is worth 7 figures, and in my mind, this is early on. I assume, oh, I know what a checking account is. You know what a checking account is. So that means he can't do that. Like, so I start from ground zero, making sure they know the basic stuff. You know,
a lot of these kids. That come into a lump sum of money is first-time wealthy people, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to like coach them and guide them. Like you said, you can't assume nothing. I got to coach them and guide them from the checking account to the savings to mutual funds, the whole shebang. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How important is it for them to? How important is it for them to manage their own money and sign their own checks? Like a lot of financial advisors put them in situations where the financial advisor is signing the checks for them, Some of them have family members that are handling the money. How important is it for a player to be totally aware and be the only person who can authorize that his funds are released for whatever it may be, whether it's a bill, a purchase, or a loan or anything like that?
Yeah, that is critical in my opinion. Again, I don't know how other firms do it. I've heard of instances like that, but from where we stand, we feel like that it's very risky when there's somebody else who can say yeah to this purchase outside of the player. Because at the end of the day, this is the player's money, right? They're the ones that
So you recommend the player keep total control of the money?
Oh yeah, they need to be the final sign off before money's going any place. They need to be aware of it, and if it doesn't make sense, then it needs to stop until it does make sense, right? Now that the players sometimes don't always want that because they don't want the hassle, right? They just want to be able to say, yeah. I sent the text message, go ahead and take care of this, send this to my mom, right? And they get annoyed when I've already said, giving you a text message approval. And then when the official approval comes across, they feel like I've already done this, but we always explain, listen, man, this is the only way that you can ensure that you're staying on top of all of this, right? And to me, I'm an advocate of it because I think it forces them to learn, right? I mean, if they're not seeing, a good sense of like what's going on every single month and what's going out, then they have no awareness of it. And so the whole idea that that we try to instill, and just in general, when people are working with these young guys, is just a sense of like that this just doesn't last forever. Like everything that you do has a consequence, especially in finances. It's not like we have unlimited resources. If you spend money on this side, that means those dollars are not available to be used on this side. And so the only way they can know that is they got to be able to see, right? And it's funny because they start seeing, this how much I'm paying for my cell phone bill. It's just kind of interesting when they are forced to go through and look at it all.
So do you ever run into a situation where a player may ask you to allow somebody else to manage it as well, in terms of like giving their brother or giving one of their friends access to kind of deal with the day-to-day part? And do you try to get them to stay away from that?
Yeah, so early on, I mean, we started getting involved in helping with a lot of the day-to-day stuff, really just because we started to realize that if we didn't do that, like it was a train wreck waiting to happen, right? So like when I first started out, I've been doing this now for 16 years, we would kind of do the normal stuff that a kind of a retiree, an adult person, portfolio management, all that sort of stuff, right? And then we started realizing that we thought, okay, everybody should be able to write their own checks and do all that part of it and do that aspect of it. We realized a lot of these young guys just either A, didn't know how, or B, knew how and just didn't want to do it, right? So what ended up being the case is they started just handing the checkbook over to mom, handing the checkbook over to their buddy, having somebody else. We realized they weren't going to do it. And even though we wanted them to do it themselves, they was going to turn around and just give it to somebody else to do, right? And so then we kind of felt like, okay, this industry is way too small, right? And it seems like this big industry, but your name travels pretty quickly. And we realized that, okay, if somebody knows that we're working with a particular client, but they don't know that we're not handling the day-to-day, and that mom is, or brother is, or he got a guy from high school, and that's who he's delegated it to. If anything starts happening weird with that checking account, right, because their friend, like, we won't even have a chance to explain into the industry that, no, that we weren't doing that. Like, if money comes up missing, the world's going to know, oh, that's a Signify Wealth client. That must have been, and then your name is trash. So then we kind of reluctantly started to work in that space initially, and then we kind of realized that, like, wow, all right, we need to be working in this space because there's so much that these guys don't understand, right? And it's kind of it's a scary idea to think that you hand over that amount of control to someone that doesn't have systems in place and really doesn't have licenses in place so that you have some accountability, right? You can just, anybody can do it, you hand it over to them and it can be a problem. So for most of the folks that we work with, they kind of come into an understanding that we kind of have a broad, a whole scale comprehensive plan. And in order to, and a big part of that plan is keeping an eye on what's going out, right? You can have all this wonderful stuff over here, but if you're blowing through this money like crazy, then, it's not going to last. So we really try to make sure that they have a plan on that part of it as well, not just handing it over to somebody and nobody knows what the heck is going on until it's too late.
If you a young person and you want to be, if they want to be you, if they want to be a financial advisor, a wealth management advisor, what's kind of the academic path that you would tell them to take?
Yeah, I think business school is a really good approach for sure, because there's so many things that you learn about business, right? I was a finance major. I know a lot of times people may go the accounting route. I love finance, and I'm biased toward that because I took tons of financial courses, tons of accounting classes, a lot of marketing classes as well. It's kind of a prerequisite of what you need to cover. But the general exposure to finance, and more importantly, the business, because that's where a lot of the value add comes as well. I mean, of course, we do all the financial planning, but then these athletes, I would say they're walking corporations in a lot of ways, right? So they also need someone that can help see that and pull some of that out, help plan through that part of it. So I think going to business school is a great stepping stone. And then from there, once you kind of have that background, then you got to start thinking through, like, what are the segments, or who are the people that I feel like I can connect the best with, right? And I can add the most value to, right? It could be teachers, it could be athletes, it could be a lot of different avenues. And that requires, in a lot of ways, really taking like a self-assessment and having some humility to be able to say, okay, now, not do I necessarily, you want to balance, because you do want to work in the field that you feel like are people that you want to work with, but who you want to work with may not necessarily be the same people that you can actually help a whole lot. And so being able to navigate the two of that, I see a lot of people really get excited about the sports world, and it's a different animal, you know what I mean? And so it's not for everybody, right? Whereas some of those people might have had a phenomenal career working with a different demographic. So everybody, I think, teaches his own in that way.
Do you, if it's young people in the area, do you ever give opportunities for internships and things of that nature?
Oh yeah, we do. We actually have in the past. What we have been trying to do more of is finding ways to offer internships, because again, you're talking to a guy that didn't even know this industry existed, right? And I think that's why a lot of times we're underrepresented, because we just don't know sometimes these careers even exist. So I love to do internships. I've also been an advocate to make sure that I don't want an internship that's where it's like you're making copies, you're getting coffee. I want it to be something that's meaningful, and they get a chance to learn. So I started early on doing a bunch. I pulled back most recently because I'm like, okay, I want to make sure that if I'm gonna have a young person that's committed to being in the office, I want to make sure it's a value add. And then the last piece of it too, because of who we deal with and the information is so doggone sensitive, then we also try to find very meaningful ways for them to get engaged, but also maintaining the level of privacy that our clients need. So it's a little bit trickier for us to do, but I'm always open to it. And a lot of times, sometimes that ends up meaning that we can't find a space to plug them in because we're talking about real life stuff that if it got out, TMZ would love to hear about. But that means I do a lot of one-on-one mentoring and getting together with people and explaining who I am, what we do, and bringing them out of the office. So that's stuff I enjoy doing.
So you work with the common folk as well as the elite athlete.
Yeah, so we have, let me see if I can get my numbers. We got over 30 professional athletes. I think we have about 80 clients total. So we started off with just working with kind of just anybody who needed help. And most of them were public school teachers. And we still have probably 20 plus teachers that are clients of ours that we can continue to service. We have since obviously morphed. So because even though our athletes make up a smaller number of our client base from an asset level standpoint, they are the majority. So we've been able to kind of shift our services to make sure that we're providing really the services that those folks need at a high level. So at this stage, we're pretty selective about who we work with on the athlete side and the non-athlete side, just because we don't want to say yes to somebody and then not be able to deliver at a high level. So we still do work with non-athletes as well, but we also just want to make sure up front that it's a really good fit before we fully engage.
Should all high school and college athletes, do you recommend that while they're in college that they take some form of financial literacy?
Oh, absolutely. I had a mentor in this business who taught me a lot. So not the person that convinced me to start in this line of work, but the person who I just kind of walked alongside and learned a lot. He always had a saying that said, Stephen, he's like, when you go to college, you can major in whatever you major in, but when you graduate, we're all finance majors, right? And that really stuck with me because he's like, regardless of what you graduate in, when it's all said and done, you're gonna have some sort of job, you're gonna be making some amount of money, and then it's up to you to figure out how to manage all of that. So because of that reality, you should have some sort of basic training around what the heck do I do with this when I get it, regardless of what level it actually is.
So you believe, like when the college recruiters recruit the kid, they say the next 4 years set you up for the next 40. You believe that?
Oh, yeah, I do. I mean, I've never been part of the college recruiting process, but I think it's true. I think that's true.
Because every school always, when you go on campus, hey, the next 4 years set you up for the next 40. Choose wisely.
They all say that.
Yeah, they always say that. Yeah.
So Stephen, we're gonna wrap up. Before we get out of here, if people wanted to follow you on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, what are your usernames so people follow you on social media?
Yeah, so I will admit right now I am on some social media platforms. I'm so doggone busy a lot of times that I don't engage nearly like I should. Even though a lot of my guys are like, bro, we need to see more of you. So I'm gonna try to do better. But the main one I stay on is Instagram, and you can find me there at dsrhodes, THESRHODES. I'm on Facebook as well, but honestly, I don't really engage there too much. And then, of course, if you want to know more about Signify Wealth, just check out signifywealth.com.
Hey, where is your office located, real quick?
Yeah, so we're here in St. Louis. We're on Clayton Road, so not too far from the Galleria. Most people remember the Tropicana. We're within walking distance from there, so yeah, we enjoy it.
All right.
I think we glad you came on, Stephen. We enjoyed you, and I'll be in touch with you. Thanks, bro. I appreciate you coming on.
Sir, appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Appreciate you, brother.
I'll talk to you later.
A dream deferred. Stephen Rhodes showed you that a backup plan is necessary and is vital. He had dreams of being a Division I college football player, but once that didn't work out for him, he had his academics to fall on, and it took him into a very successful career. The things that he said have to really resonate with you young athletes. Take care of your education, understanding that your brand and your image, your likeness, and your money is all your responsibility. Be tuned into your career and make sure that the people that you have working for you know that they're working for you. This is your career, this is your life, and you need to be front and center for all the decisions that are being made. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and always remember, keep working.